I actually am going to clip this on here. So how I discovered the term fresh hell. I will stand by this as probably the best way to discover that term. Is it was probably a decade ago now. My stepbrother was playing Project Cross Zone 2. Was it 2 or was it 1? It was one of the Project Cross Zone games. And it had Mega Man X and Mega Man Zero in it. And there's one map that I will not forget. It has a bunch of spikes on it. And if you know anything about the Mega Man series, this is actually perfect because the Mega Man series is, dear Lord, could I go on about the storytelling in that series? Anyway, if you know anything about the Mega Man series, spikes are an instant kill. Just touch them, dead. Don't matter. Don't matter if it's from the side. Don't matter if it's from below. You touch spikes, you gone. They are allergic. You wouldn't think robots are capable of allergies, but they are. And there was one map in Project Cross Zone where X and Zero are brought to a map with spikes on it. And they go, "What fresh vision of hell have you brought us to?" And my stepbrother shared that line with me, and I went, "There's no friggin' way." And he went, "Absolutely." And he took me to the chapter, and he showed me the dialogue, and I went, "What the frick?" And he goes, "I know." And I went, "It's perfect." And he goes, "I know." And so ever since then, fresh hell has made its way into my repertoire, as well as the phrase, "What fresh vision of hell have you brought me to?" So that's a thing I do now. But that this being the perfect transition, I love the storytelling in the Mega Man X and Zero series. I do, and I understand that kind of makes me like a dime a dozen nerd, right? Because everybody's like, but everybody also I think underplays the storytelling in Mega Man X because it's similar to the story in fighting games, right? It's there, and if it wasn't there, you would notice, but it's not really why people play Mega Man X games. They don't. Well, I mean, most normal ones don't play it for the plot. They don't play it because there's some fascinating story. They play it for the platforming, right? And I have both X Legacy collections for the Switch. But I'm going to tell you outright, I have not been able to beat Mega Man X3. And I haven't been able to beat X3 because it has what I call rental difficulty, which is back in the day, we used to have to rent games from local Blockbusters or Hollywood Videos or whatever your game rental store of choice was. And you'd only be able to rent like one game a weekend, right? Maybe a whole week if you were one of those kids with one of those kinds of parents. Let me get something to drink real quick because my throat's getting tired. Anyway, so how did game manufacturers make their money if the game was so easy to pick up, right? Because you can beat just about any of them if you know their weakness, you know the right order, and you practice their patterns. All the bosses and all the levels, normally, they had to be all the levels had to be somewhat accessible so that no matter who you started with, you could navigate them. And all the bosses had to be somewhat beatable in case they were the first boss you picked. But then you get to the final castle. And this is true of all Mega Man series, but X, I think, was the worst for it. And I mean that in the best way and the worst way. It was one of those things where it was designed so you wouldn't be able to beat it in a weekend. You couldn't just take Mega Man X, beat it over the weekend, bring it back. You had to go back at least one more weekend if you were a good gamer, and like 3 or 4 if you were the average gamer. Just so you could really, you had to remember your password systems, you had to have the time set aside to grind for filling up your sub-tanks, because when you put in a password, they wouldn't be full. You had to hope that you had the TV long enough to actually even play it without your family causing an issue. Which is, weirdly enough, how kids in the old days got so good at games. They got good at games because they had a limited amount of time, and therefore they couldn't optimize their play. They had to they had to optimize how quickly they could beat the game. They're like, what's the minimum amount of resources I need to beat this boss before I have to give the TV back to my parents? Because nobody was going to let their kid play SNES all day unless they had a sleepover or it was Saturday. Saturday, you could usually get away with it until about 4 or 5 if you had really cool parents. I had my story about that's different, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, so I like the X series. It was gameplay time was important back then. But I like the X series for the story, and it's this weird thing for me because I'm like, I understand why everybody gets on X's head, right? X in every game is infamous for why must Reploids fight to steal a Brain Scratch Comms meme. Yeah, by the way, do you expect Brain Scratch Comms to be referenced in a stream about storytelling? Don't get me started on that, actually. They have their own way of telling comedy stories, and they're darn good at it. Anyway, X gets a lot of flack for why must Reploids fight, which is why the most horrendous game in the world to me is a Mega Man X spin-off game, but we'll get to that further in this story. When I first started playing it, Mega Man X was such an interesting idea, because you had this Reploid that had infinite potential. He could do anything, but Dr. Light was always anti-war. He wasn't interested in making robots into weapons. He wanted to make them like people. But he knew that conflict was inevitable. Even in human lives, we have conflict. So adaptability and, the ability to go to war was an important part of his designs for the Mega Man series. And especially after his initial light robots were taken over and he had to convert Rock into Mega Man. But he didn't want X to be bound by that. He didn't want X to just be a soldier. And it shows in everything X does. Every interaction he has, while he will fight you. He will fight to save people. I never once got the idea that X was there specifically to kill you. I think that's why him letting all the Mavericks talk made sense to me. I don't understand why Zero lets them talk. Zero, I think, just like he just thinks he's giving them their last words. I don't know what's up with that. Or maybe X was a good influence on him. I don't know. But I feel like X lets the Reploids talk because he's hoping that he can talk them down. He's hoping he can get them to come to their senses and fight back. Because I don't think he enjoys the conflict, but he's not scared to weigh in on it. And it shows throughout all of the series. People get tired of the whining because the games are only a few hours long and then they want to go on a marathon. And after you've done 8 hours continuously of every single time there's a conflict, there's this one guy whining and moaning of why he has to kill people. Yeah, I would imagine if you're going to go on a marathon and this is like 6 different times he's had to do this and he keeps complaining, this is why people prefer Samus. Because Samus just knows this, but she's a bounty hunter. X is an X hunter, like he's a Maverick hunter, but he's not really. He's more like a cop than he is a bounty hunter. Whereas Samus is more like frickin' vigilante than she is bounty hunter. And I like that about Samus. It's a whole separate character arc, but we'll get back to that. But I liked that contrast because you can see how over time he has an effect on Zero. Because by the time we get to the Zero series, we get to see a version of Zero that is even unsure of himself, and yet he finds a way to bridge that gap, to still be himself. And I am a huge believer in the fact that, like, everybody can go, well, the Omega was his original body, but his mind was successfully transferred to the new body, and I go, I don't think it matters. In every version of... Because I literally have to play only the X4 onward, because I cannot play as X. I am terrible at jump and shoot. But I have never once failed as Zero. Zero is my playstyle. I used to play Marth all the time in Melee, and that's who I blame for me being good at playing Zero. And whenever I play as Zero, The vibe I've gotten is that Zero is his own man. He might be influenced by the people around him, but he never does anything because he's ordered to or commanded to. He could walk away from the Maverick Hunters at any time if he felt he wanted to. In fact, that's the point in time where even when X tries to confront him in X5, he goes, maybe you've gone Maverick. Maybe you need to go back. Because he's like, I'm not going to just go back because you ordered me to. I don't care if you have reasons to be concerned for me. This is my fight, and I'm not going to back down. So when you finally get to the Zero series, and it's like, which is the real Zero? I'm like, the real Zero is the one I'm controlling. Because Zero is the kind of character who, as soon as, say, the Sigma virus takes over, or the Mother Elf takes over, he's not himself because he's not the one calling the shots anymore. It's the virus. It's his original programming. It's the Mother Elf herself. It's not Zero. Zero, when Sigma broke his head, became his own person, and he chose his own road. And that's what it means to be Zero. And so I liked that arc, that story, where even when he's like even if you want to say he's not the Biometal and it's just his personality, Biometal Z is still Zero to me. He still behaves like Zero, he still thinks like Zero, and he only chooses people who he knows will choose their own road, because that's who Zero is. And he's not going to sit here and mess around. I don't know. Do you think... I know Zero might have been based on Bass's programming, same way that Mega Man X was based on Mega Man's programming. Because if you look at the Mega Man and Bass video game, and you look at some of how he's done, Bass is strongly independent. He has a rivalry with Mega Man, but Bass is not... He listens to Wily the same way that Rock listens to Light, but he doesn't really need Wily. He's there to fight because he wants to beat Mega Man. He's there to fight because he's the best robot and he's going to prove it. So I think if we're going to go by that route, the real Zero might have been Bass. I think Bass might have just been the base programming used to start off Zero, the same way that Rock was used as the base programming for X before the advantages. But no, moving on from there, because this is a part of the story. My love for the X series' story is a part of why there is one game in that series that absolutely pisses me off to zero ends. And you'd think, oh, he means Mega Man X6, because X6 was an abomination and it was poorly programmed. Oh, yeah, that's there. But that's not the one who pisses me off, because Mega Man X6 is laughably bad and poorly programmed, and everybody's complained about that. The one game I don't think gets enough hate, and I don't think gets enough resistance, and I don't think has gotten enough love to fix what's wrong with it, because the part of what's wrong with it is in the story, is Mega Man X Command Mission. Because we have another game that brings up, what does it mean to be a Maverick? What does it mean? Because I guarantee to you that the big old boss who's projected to you from the very beginning, the guy who initially whoops your butt and you have to blow up a whole rooftop to get away from him, he doesn't... I've met Mavericks. He doesn't talk like one. He doesn't seem to have the Sigma virus. He doesn't sound like he's unreasonable. He doesn't sound like he's selfish. He just wants independence for him and his Reploid friends. He isn't even interested in the MacGuffin medal, really. He's just using it as kind of a deterrent so he and his friends can have independence. And he makes up that very good point to X of what does define a Maverick? I don't mean harm to humans. That's not my goal. I just wanted independence, and now you're hunting me. And they don't capitalize on that. They don't draw attention to it. They don't really explore what he means by that. Whereas the rest of the X series has X actively contemplating if that's what that means. When he runs into people like that, he has an emotional crisis. And this was an RPG. He should have had some lines to that. He should have had some moments of doubt. He should have had Zero reassuring him yet again that it didn't matter if he intended to be a Maverick. He was acting in a way that was endangering innocent lives. And I liked that as a premise. And you could have made a good RPG off that. Really one that matched the themes of Mega Man X, of having And of course, you have to end on Sigma, except Mega Man X Command Mission doesn't. So it's not even a Mega Man X game in that regard. Because Sigma doesn't make a single appearance in it, which is weird. I mean, it's supposed to take place. Like, it was released sometime after Mega Man X5, so I think the implication is. Because back when X5 was first released, there was an implication that when Sigma made the Zero virus, his personality kind of went under. And when he did kind of pop back up, he was finally defeated. And it's one of the things that bothered me about Command Mission is you have all these neat characters with interesting stories, and you give them all 5 lines of dialogue about it, and then you move on with their life, and then you act later like you gave them a huge arc, and you didn't. And you do that with multiple people. You don't make the bosses very compelling. And the one plot twist, which I will not spoil for you, because it is the only thing this game ever did right, and it would actually made the problem worse for me, because I'm like, this was something you hid in plain sight. You did super good at hiding it from me because I didn't see it coming, and you hit it so well, but you fumbled the ball so often on the way up here that not only did you not even telegraph that this was a thing, but you did one aspect of hiding this person in plain sight with me, and then you want to pat your back about it. And I'm like, do you know how much of the rest of this story you have butchered? How much lost potential you left on the floor? Do you know how many characters you have wasted? Do you know how much of my life you have burned away with your needlessly high encounter rates with minimal experience grinding for frickin' levels that don't even frickin' matter? Because everybody ends that game with the same party. It's the same party every time. Maybe one variation, but it's basically the same party every single time, and that's not a good RPG. And it's a whole... They botched all the RPG system. The things that did work were stolen from better RPGs. And all the dialogue and all the story was not in theming with Mega Man X at all, but it was pretending like it was. And there's nothing that offends me more than you acting like you're smarter than you are, and you acting like you're something that you're not when you are a story. There is nothing that sets me off on a story more than when it goes, oh, aren't I so subversive? And I go, by subversive, do you mean that you promised me a dress and you left me a bunch of scraps of fabric and some thread and told me to, sew it myself? Because, no, that's not subversive. That's just evil. That's just wrong. You promised me a dress. This is not a dress. This is the fixins. And if you made a business out of that, you would be sued into oblivion immediately. Yeah, and that's... Yeah, and I don't like games or stories in general that waste my time like that. And that's what's gotten me about modern fiction. And it's a part of what got me wanting to write my stories again. Because I've been wanting to write them. I'm going to stop my recording real quick.